So good afternoon. My name is Tom Hughes. I'm a Senior Market Services Executive at the IUA, and I'll be chairing this afternoon's session. So thank you very much for joining. This is, of course, the third in our series of 4 Aviation Wordings Masterclasses hosted by the IUA Junior Aviation Practitioners Working Group. Hopefully many of you were able to attend the first 2 sessions, and if you did, that you found them useful. Before we do get started today, as a quick reminder, we will be circulating the recording, a link to the recording and the presentation slides as we did for the first 2 sessions. When we circulate that will be following a review and receipt of approval of the content, which can take a couple of days, so do bear with us and we will get the link and the slides across to you. Hopefully you're either familiar with or have already spotted the Q&A facility within the webinar platform. You should find that just at the bottom of your screen. So take a look and please do take the opportunity to provide some questions for our speakers during the session. It's also worth pointing out that we will be utilizing the poll facility within the platform. So you'll see that crop up on a couple of occasions. Please do provide your answers and we'll be anonymizing and collating those results and taking a look at those during the session. And lastly, hopefully you all received a copy of our clause pack that was sent round ahead of the session. That was in an email from the IUA's events manager, Deborah Finch. So as with the first 2 sessions, I would like to again stress that we are, of course, all here to learn and there really are no incorrect questions. However, I do need to point out that our experts are here to provide their individual views on the rationale behind model aviation clauses and, of course, their theoretical operation only. So we won't be answering any questions related to ongoing coverage matters in the market. So please do refrain from asking those questions. Okay, Tony, if we can jump to the next slide, we can take a very quick look at the format for our masterclass series. So we do have 4 virtual wording sessions. As I said, we're on session 3 today, and collectively, these should provide an overview of common aviation wordings. Following these 4 sessions, we have 2 in-person claims masterclasses, and at those sessions, we'll be working through a large aviation loss scenario in order to establish some of the key considerations for practitioners during the handling of a large loss. So I think now I can introduce our speakers. And I'm very pleased to say that we are again joined by Jette Varnels. Jette is Technical and Wordings Manager for Aerospace at AXA XL. And we also have Gareth Howe. Gareth is the Underwriting Technical Director for Global Aerospace. Now, before I pass over to Jette and Gareth, we'll move to the next slide and I'll ask Tony to run a very quick audience poll. So look out for the poll that will pop up on your screen, hopefully about now. So it's a very simple question just to find out if you've managed to attend any of our previous sessions. So the first response is yes, I attended session 1 only. Yes, I attended session 2 only. Third is session 1 and 2, and then you have a no, but I've received the recordings, and then a simple no. So we'll just hold on for a moment or two and allow everyone to provide their responses. I think we're nearly there. A few more seconds. Okay, if we have a look at the responses. Okay, so it looks like just under half of attendees managed to attend both session 1 and 2, which is fantastic. We've got about 15% of people that didn't manage to attend but have received copies of the recordings, which is great. And then 15% didn't attend and haven't received the recordings. So we'll make sure that the recordings from the first 2 sessions are sent to all attendees from this session. Okay, so I think now we'll move on to the next slide and we'll take a very quick look at one of the outstanding questions from our previous session. And I'll put this question to Gareth. And the question is, why does paragraph 1B of AVN 46B not apply to the pollution or contamination of goods or products sold or supplied by the insured?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So for those that were on last week, they'll recall that we had AVN 46B, the noise and pollution and other perils exclusion clause that we discussed. Now, not within the clause, but normally appended to it, it says that paragraph 1B of that clause, i.e. pollution and contamination, doesn't apply to pollution or contamination of goods or products sold or supplied by the insured. And the reason for that is because of the product liability exposure. Now, not so much on an airline risk, although there is quite often an small element of products exposure on an airline. But the reason is because of product liability exposure, and it's an unintended consequence to exclude pollution or contamination of goods or products. So if you think about a manufacturer making a component, during the manufacturing process, it gets contaminated with an oil that wasn't supposed to be on it. The product gets shipped and it leads to a loss. It was never the intention of the insurance market to exclude that kind of pollution and contamination. That's very different to pollution and contamination being caused by a product that leaves the factory. So that's the distinction, and that's the reason why that's nearly always appended to 46B.
Excellent. Thank you, Gareth. I think that was very clear. So we can now move on to the first section of our session today. And I would just encourage you, please do provide questions throughout the session, and I'll be very happy to put these to our speakers following their various presentations. So over to you with my thanks, Yeda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, and welcome to everybody online. I am going to talk about the airline finance contract endorsement, AV67B, which has been in use for many years to provide additional coverage or provide coverage for an aircraft owner who has leased their aircraft to an aircraft operator. The provision in before AV67B or before AV67 clauses were developed, we had the market looking at lease contracts day in, day out. There were large documents, and there was often many things that the lessor wanted the lessee to take on in terms of risk and exposure and commitment under their insurance before they would release the aircraft to the lessee. That obviously became very complicated when the leasing market grew, and a method was designed to make it simpler for insurers to provide coverage, but only on a more structured format. And that was the AV67, which has evolved into 67B and more recently into 67C. Both of these clauses will be in the packs that Tom has previously provided, or they've been available to attendees. So there are slight differences between 67B and 67C. We're still seeing 67B as the most prevalent clause. So, Tony, if I can have the next slide, please. Right, hang on, sorry, my mistake. Can we go back? The information that the insurers need, and that is required, that is stated in the lease agreement, is identifying the equipment. It can be an aircraft, it can be engines or other financed equipment that the aircraft operator acquires, and by using AV67B, we can provide coverage for that equipment. We identify it, we show what the deductible would be, who the contract parties are, i.e. those interested parties who will need to be indemnified if there is a loss to the equipment. The contract has to be identified, what type of contract it is, when it's effective from, and any additional premium. The appointed broker, because the broker is the middleman as far as this is concerned, and communication in respect to this, the lease agreement and the coverage provided under the insurance policy will be via the broker. The additional premium is there to provide a consideration for the coverage that is being granted under the AV67 endorsement attaching to the insured's original policy. Without the consideration, the contract isn't established, and therefore this must be shown. In reality, it has been shown for many years as receipt hereby acknowledged, and the funds are not actually being collected, but the facility is there. It creates a contract, and it it makes the airline contract, an airline insurance policy, effectively a composite policy. It covers the same subject matter, but for different interests between the operator who's operating the equipment and the owners of the equipment, and they have no operational control of the equipment. And now, Tony, can we go on to the next slide, please? And what I've highlighted here is when the coverage is provided under the operator's policy. So we say that it's from the effective date, which is stated in the schedule. So when the lease commences, the insured agrees to take on the responsibility for the equipment, and it continues until the expiry of the policy, because our policy is only effective from the inception to the expiry. And even though the lease contract might be providing a requirement for the insured to insure for longer than the insurance policy, and indeed the lease agreement itself is for much longer than the insurance policy, each new policy will have to be endorsed accordingly. That's often done automatically. So until expiry of the insurance, or until the expiry of the agreed termination of the contract, or until the obligations under the contract are terminated by the action of the insured or the contract parties, whichever shall first occur. Now, this third termination provision is really quite important, because if the lease provides that the aircraft operator must do one thing or another, and if they don't do that, the lease is considered to be terminated, then once such an event happens, the coverage under AV67B falls away. There is no doubt about that, and that can of course be a problem, because the insured may still have an obligation under the contract to insure. So this point was raised some years ago, and were one of the reasons that AV67 came into being. But we'll talk about that in a short while. So please, can I have the next slide, please? So this provision provides for who will get the funds if there's a claim on the asset, if it's damage to the asset, who will manage how that payment is made and who the payment will go to. And obviously, if it's a total loss, it's easy. The contract party will determine where the payment has to be made. But in respect of another loss, i.e. one that is not a total loss, we sometimes see some confusion, because people will assume, the insured might assume, the adjusters might assume, that in fact the payment goes to the repair shop. And in most cases it will. However, depending on the lease contract and the provision therein, we might find that there has to be a consultation between the contract parties and the insured, and maybe the adjusters. And it's very important that before repairs are made or authorized, that the insured is aware of who he has to consult with. If, for example, the lease agreement provides that any payments or any damage that's worth more than, say, $100,000 or $250,000 must be notified and discussed with the lessor or the contract party, then they will be in some sort of default if they go ahead and have the aircraft repaired without consulting with the contract parties. And insurers would be reluctant to sign off on the payment being made if they're not satisfied that the insured has met his obligations under the contract as far as a partial damage is concerned. Tony, would you go on to the next slide, please? And there's obviously the lessor may have different interests in aircraft operations and finance agreements, etc. And we make a provision in the clause that the coverage we're giving under AV67B is only in their capacity as financier or lessor, and because they may have other interests, and we are acknowledging that if they have other capacity, that's not the coverage we're providing, but it may mean that they may have information which as a financier they don't have, and we would not be taking that into consideration. For example, if they're a risk manager, doesn't know that the other arm, maybe of maintenance or something like that, not relating to this aircraft, but perhaps to other business they have with the insured, we may have they may have information. We can't take that, and we should not take that into consideration. And one of the important points that AV67 provides for is what we refer to as breach of warranty coverage. It's not just breach of warranty; it's breaching some terms and conditions under the policy, and provided they have no operational interest, provided they haven't been involved and caused, contributed, or allowed, knowingly condoned the thing that has breached the condition under the policy, then coverage will still be provided for the contract party's interest. But it is important to note that it is breach of any term or any condition or any warranty of the policy. It does not apply to breach specifically of exclusions, because where there's no coverage for under the policy, coverage won't be granted to the lessor. So there are sometimes confusion relating to this particular point. Can we have the next slide, please, Tony? This provides that the contract party does not have any responsibility for premiums under the policy, but we may be allowed to deduct, insurers may be allowed to deduct outstanding premiums insofar as it relates only to that equipment that is insured and for which the policy is indemnifying the contract party. And then there's a provision that insurers are have rights of subrogation, all those rights that the contract party might have had or will have in the event of them paying a claim. That's normal under an insurance contract. And the reason this language is included here as well is, as I said before, this is creating almost a standalone policy alongside the terms and conditions under the all risk policy that this clause attaches to. Can we have the next slide, please, Tony? And this is the cancellation provision. It has its own cancellation provision alongside the cancellation provisions under the policy that the endorsement attaches to. Of course, if that policy is cancelled, then this coverage will fall away as well, subject to notice being given. So the provision here is that we have to give a minimum of, I think we've picked up, let's have a look, Brother Gimson. This looks as if it's a provision under 67B whole war rather than the all risk. We normally give 30 days or 7 days for war, or such lesser period as is normally available or customarily provided. But we give notice to the appointed broker, and the notice is effective from when it is given, not when it is received by the broker or the contract party. I would ask that you refer to the clauses in the pack to make sure that you have a clear understanding of the notice provision given in the actual clauses. I think we've made a mistake in this slide, and I apologise for that. Can we take the next slide, please? And this is language that sits above the schedule. It's important language because what it is telling us, or what it's telling the contract party and confirming to the insured, is that other than is provided in this endorsement, the contract parties are subject to the terms, conditions, limitation, warranties, exclusions, cancellation provisions thereof. And the policy itself will not be varied by any provision that that is contained in the insurance contract and which purports to serve as an endorsement or amendment to the policy. In the past, we did see that sort of language that that the lessor or the financier required the policy to be amended for their benefit, and that would have happened in the past. It won't happen now because of this specific language that we have in the AV 67B clause. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is the just talk briefly about the differences between AV 67C and the AV 67B. You'll see that we've highlighted the reference to designated contract party. This was a term that was introduced to provide a simpler a way of dealing with the lessors and the insured for the insurers. So there could be a list of lessors, and one would take on the role of being the designated contract party. Could be a security agent or somebody like that, but that would be the entity that the insurers would be committing to providing the notice to, and who would be committing to providing information to insurers. And that was meant to make the communication between insurers and contract parties more straightforward. In reality, it's not something that's that brokers or leasing companies have been particularly comfortable with, although they were included in the discussions at the time of developing the clause. But nobody really wanted to take on that responsibility, I suppose. Although in reality, there is often a security agent that manages the lessors behind the scenes. So that's one of the reasons that the clause has not been used as widely as it might otherwise have been. Can we have the next clause, the next slide, please? And it's not very clear in what I've highlighted here, but because we have two types of highlights, we have the additional highlighted text, which have an interest or interests in the equipment under the contract. That's just to make sure that they can have multiple interests. There's more than one contract party, perhaps. And also the termination under AV 67C is a bit clearer than, or a bit more favourable to the lessor than under AV 67B. And you will note that we have two provisions this time: the date and time at which the insurance expires, or if earlier, the date and time at which the insurer has no further obligation to insure the equipment under the contract. So, and that means that even if the contract was terminated because of a default or whichever by the insured, the lessor would still continue to have the benefit of the coverage under the AV 67 provision, and that is that should be a significant benefit to the lessor, because, as I said earlier, if there was a default position which terminated the lease, even though the insured might still have obligation to insure, under 67B, the coverage will fall away. Under 67C, the coverage will continue until such time as the insured no longer has an obligation. And that is quite a significant variation between those two insuring agreements. Can we have the next slide, please? And there's also a recognition under 67C that we might have other people would have an interest other than just the financial or lessor. There might be a commercial lease service arm or manager, and of course they need to be insured under the under AB 67B as well, and that language has been included now to make sure that a service manager who's managing maybe on behalf of a financial lessor, they're not a financial lessor themselves, but they might be acting as the designated contract party, etc., but that they are entitled to the coverage under the policy. And then we're also including a definition which insurers are sort of double, belt and braces. We say what the service manager, the lease servicer or manager is, which is the contract party appointed by one or more other contract parties to provide the services relating to the equipment. These are the financial services. These are not, and I've highlighted that, that it is not the servicing as in maintenance and repairs and other operational activities on the equipment. There's a distinction between that, and at the time of drafting this clause, with the agreement of lessors who took part in the discussions about the clause, it was agreed that this would be the clearest way of showing what is and what is not a contract party under the coverage. The next slide, please. And that is the end of this sort of quick canter through AB 67, and you'll find that they are used quite a lot. And if you've got any questions, happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yeda, and a good spot in that we do in fact have the whole war versions of the clauses on screen, and I think within the clause pack. So we'll make sure we send the original as well as the whole war versions of 67B and C following the session. So just to confirm that point. And then if we move on to the questions that we received, all very good ones. So first of all, what types of amendments did lessors put into contracts before the introduction of 67B?
Well, they would have put something in to the effect that that irrespective of the coverage provided under the policy, their interest would always be covered. They would use language to incorporate terms and conditions from the lease agreement into the insurance policy, and it would be convoluted language. It would be, you might have had 200 pages of lease contract, and the insurance requirements might have been split up into several sections, and it was those type of difficulties that drove insurers to work with lessors to find a better way to allow a lease to be noted under the policy and coverage to be provided under for the lessor, because nobody had the time to sit and go through all those things that were in the contract, and which perhaps in sort of convoluted ways gave coverage, a commitment of coverage under the policy to the to the lessor where there might not have been coverage under the insurance policy for the benefit of the insured. And at the end of the day, the policy will not be wider than for the lessor than it is under just under 67B. It will be the same coverage, but it will be they get the breach of warranty. So if they don't have the operational control, then even if the insured has breach a condition, then but not an exclusion necessarily, then they will get the coverage under 67B. It is not a guarantee that they will always get coverage.
Okay, and clearly a popular subject, Yeda, as we've got a few more questions. So moving on, and I'll ask you just to keep the responses concise from now on in, just so that we can cover all of these questions. How does 67B interact with AVN 72?
Which clause?
With AVN 72.
Well, AVN 72 is a standard provision which provides that somebody who has a right under the Act reference in 72 to go direct to insurers. It says that the coverage that we won't do that. However, AV67B and other contractual provisions are extensions to the policy that says that this entity and that entity does have a direct interest under the policy. So whilst we won't have the automatic provision that might be afforded under the Act referenced in 72, the 67B does specifically give the lessor, the additional insured or contract party, whichever we call them, right under the policy.
Excellent, thank you very much. So moving on, we've got a question from Lawrence. Can endorsement 67B and C be included solely under the lessor insurance policy, or can they be added under the lessee insurance policy?
Well, that suggests that there's a misunderstanding here, because the AV67B extends the lessee's, i.e. the operator's policy to provide coverage subject to the terms and conditions of the insured's policy and subject to the terms and conditions of AV67B to the lessor, without the lessor having to have his own policy. It is not a lessor's contingent policy or anything like that. It is affording direct coverage to the lessor under the insured's policy. As I referenced before, it becomes a composite policy for two insureds with different interest in the same subject matter.
Excellent. I think that's a useful clarification. Thanks, Yeda. So the final question from Barry, and it's a point we've touched on, so probably just a good one to close this section with for absolute clarity. The question is, are there similar clauses for hull all risks? Are they more or less identical, except for the cancellation provisions, which you mentioned were 30 days for all risks versus 7 days for war?
This clause is the all risk policy clause. It attaches to for section 1. If you read the clause, section 1 is for hulls, section 2 is for liabilities, and section 3 is for both sections of the policy. So we give all risk coverage, we give liability coverage to the lessor under the clause. There is a standard hull only clause in the market, which is an AV 28B is the current clause, but that is hull coverage only, and the lessor becomes a loss payee under that particular policy, but also gets breach of warranty coverage.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think very impressive work there to get through the 4 questions in 5 minutes. Yeah, that's fantastic, all covered off. And I think it's back to you to continue and take us through AVN 60A.
And yes, I'm happy to do that. Thank you very much. Let me just take a swig more coffee. And can I have the next slide, please, Tony? And the AV60A is our personal injury extension. It provides coverage beyond the pure bodily injury liability coverage that we see on a liability an operator's liability policy. And it was introduced in the 80s to match the coverage that was granted under US airline policies, intended for airline passengers. It was issued originally as AV60 in conjunction with AV59, which specified that we were only it was only relating to the coverages that the insured's operation relating to operation of aircraft and at airport locations. So we now moved away from that language, and it's a standalone clause, AV67A personal injury extension, and it provides that we will give coverage for the offences. You'll note the lowercase word offences. It's not a defined term, but they're listed as offences, but only where such offences are committed in connection with that part of the insured's aviation operations or interest for which other coverage is granted by the policy. So if the policy, for example, does not have premises cover, but only covers the carriage of passengers, then there may be some of the offences that perhaps won't apply. But the intention is to provide broad coverage for the personal injury, similar to that coverage which was being provided under the US policies at the time with the clause originally being published. Can I have the next slide, please, Tony? And the offences are listed as sort of when you're treating somebody badly, false arrest, restraint, detention, or imprisonment. Normally, an insured would not detain somebody illegally or do something mean to a third party, but it can happen. And we're using those terms to provide the coverage. So if we don't allow somebody to go about their business, if we maliciously prosecute them, if there's wrongful entry, eviction, or other invasion of the rights of private occupancy, if we inadvertently discriminate with regard to withholding or refusing transportation, or if we are libelous and slanderous, or if we hurt them by inadvertently providing errors in medical in the provision of medical services, then the insured is covered for those type of offences. Can we have the next slide, please? Can I have? There we are. And the exclusions that apply to these are, we're not providing any coverage where there's where somebody's just agreed to provide the coverage unless it would have attached otherwise. We're not providing coverage where somebody is deliberately doing something that's illegal. We're not providing the coverage that's for liable if it was made before the policy incepted, nor if it was done knowing that it was false language, a false utterance. And we're not providing any coverage relating to the employment in any way by that person. Next slide, please. And because this is a non-physical bodily injury coverage, it is limited in the amount that we can provide insurance to the insured. And it's normally a maximum of $25 million in the annual aggregate for all the coverage that might be provided under this clause. Although we may sometimes see on airline policies in particular that the that the coverage is unlimited in respect of passengers. So that is because you would normally expect to only have 1 or 2 passengers involved in a situation at any one time, whereas of course the other offences could be broader in scope and more people involved. But and we are more strictly liable towards our passengers anyhow. So that's a quick canter through AV60A. I'll take any questions if there are any. I think we've got a Q&A after this one, haven't we?
Yeah, we do have one very quick question now, Yeda, so perhaps we can deal with this now. The question is, what is inadvertent discrimination understood to mean? Has it been tested, and is it intended to pick up unconscious bias?
I don't think unconscious bias existed when the clause was drafted. I think the intention of that language is that you would not that you should not discriminate against anybody, but certainly that term was not in use when the clause was drafted. And of course, you can't have inadvertent discrimination. It is a better term to use subconscious. What did you call it?
Bias.
Bias, yeah. It's never. I don't think it's ever really been tested. But I have seen a case which was rejected where somebody suggested that he was being discriminated against because he was a very tall person and he had purchased an economy seat, and obviously he was quite uncomfortable in his economy seat, and his claim did fail because you are free to choose which type of seat you want to buy, and it's known that there is less leg room in an economy seat than there is in perhaps a business class or first class seat. There is a financial, they cost more, so there's a financial implication, but you have a choice. So everybody have the same choice of buying seats. So that was not considered to be discrimination, inadvertent or otherwise. So I'm not aware that it has been tested other than in that particular situation.
Thank you, Yeda. And one final question. We've just had a question through from one of our junior practitioner working group members. So this is, I think, referring to some kind of reinstatement. So can you add a buyback to the aggregate so insureds can restart their aggregate again for an additional premium if that's used up some way through the policy period?
I would say that there could be a situation where somebody might want to do that, but unlike the reinsurance programs like excess of loss, etc., which are on an aggregate basis, where there are automatic reinstatements, in respect of the aggregate limits for this policy, for this clause, and for other policies with aggregate limits, there has never been a desire to provide any reinstatements. So I haven't seen it, but I would expect that it if there was some sort of demand for it, a market would develop, whether within the policy or as an excess market. But there's never been a call for it.
And I lied to you before, Yeda, because we have one final question before we pass over to Gareth, and it is only a quick one, I promise. So is AVN60A generally more issued in the US?
No, it's attaching to all airline policies and nowadays, and it is also attaching to premises risks, so airport risks and the like, where a lot of people travel through the facilities. And we also see it on those sort of hybrid operations that might be a large general aviation operator or maybe a small airline. So it's very much in use these days.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I